Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Hey, I've been getting some questions here lately about how we're able to make our cutting boards here at the shop and get them to come out so good with really tight glue ups, nice and straight and flat without any imperfections whatsoever. So I thought I'd take a few minutes to share with you guys my process and how we do it with the use of a few little simple jigs and a little common sense. I'll show you how I do it. Alright guys, I had planned on showing y'all my process for the way I use the joiner and straighten out the boards, because you need to start with one straight edge, but we lost the footage, but it's pretty basic. That being said, if you don't have a joiner, there is other things you can do. I do have this little jig I made. It's just a piece of plywood with some clamps with a known straight edge. You can register that straight edge up against your fence and just clamp whatever board you have on here. It doesn't matter how crooked it is, and you can just use that to pass it through your table saw, and it's going to give you a straight cut. Alright, that being said, we already have ours cut to length. I want to share something with you guys. It's a little jig that I bought off of Temu. I think it was less than $20, but this is the way that I've started cutting my thin strips. It doesn't matter how thick or wide you want them. You can actually set this tool however far you want it off the blade. Right now I have it set for about 1.25 inches because that was what the customer wanted for the thickness of their board. So what you got to do is you just pretend this is a solid board, since we've obviously already cut it. But you just, once you have this set in place, you slide your fence over to it just barely touches the bearing. You lock your fence. You would turn your saw on and just push the board through there, right? And cut one strip, and then just repeat the process. You just slide your board over again until it touches the bearing. You lock it in place, and you would just cut your next strip, right? And you just repeat the process however many strips you needed. And if you need some that are thinner and wider, to me this is the safest way I found to do it, to where you don't have to get your fingers too terribly close to the blade. So now that you have your strips cut to length, we're going to come over to my workbench, and I'm going to show you a little simple jig I made to help hold my clamps in place. That way everything's not all flopping around while you're trying to get your good glue up. Alright guys, we got all our strips cut and we're ready to start putting the board together. I just want to take a second to share a little jig that I came up with a while back that really will help you ensure that your boards are straight and square, and makes it so much easier. I constructed this out of a piece of plywood and some 2x4s, and I put some adjustable feet on the bottom. They're just some T-nut inserts with some bolts in there. That way you can adjust the level of everything to get everything nice and straight. The benefit of this is it actually helps you raise your clamps up high enough to where you can get cawls underneath it and give you room to put clamps. So it's helped a lot. It keeps your clamps from falling over side to side when you're trying to get everything lined up with a bunch of little pieces that have glue all over them. Okay, so the first thing I want to do, once I have my jigs in place, I have them evenly spaced, pretty much square. That way when I have my clamps on there and I squeeze them down, everything will be pretty much square. Because I like to take a little bit of paste wax and I'll smear it on all surfaces of the board. That's just going to help keep the glue from sticking to the areas that of the wood when you clamp it down. You don't have to get crazy with it, just a little tiny bit of paste wax and you're good to go. And I'll do the same thing with my clamps. You'll see as I put them in here how easy it is just to drop them in on the end. On this end too, they lock right into place and they open right up for you, so you can just set your strips on top. And once you have your clamps and your bottom clamps in place, I also like to put a little wax on those too to prevent any glue that squeezes out from your clamp up from sticking to your clamp itself. It can be a pain to clean off. You don't need a lot, just a tiny bit, and that glue won't stick as bad. All right. So next thing I want to show you guys is if you ever work with exotics, you need to make sure before you start making your cutting board and gluing it up. A lot of these exotics, like in this case it's Purple Heart, they will excrete a bunch of oils, and those oils can actually affect the glue joint, and they'll cause it not to bond right. So what I'll do is I'll take a little acetone on a rag, and just the ones that have a lot of oils, like it'll be like Paduke and Purple Heart, and there's a few others, but just give them a little wipe down with just a little acetone. And I'm foregoing gloves. Normally I would use gloves, but for the sake of the video I'm taking one for the team. Just wipe all that off, and it's going to pull all that oil off of the wood, and you're going to get a much better glue up, less chance of delamination. But you can see all the oils that are being pulled out of the wood. Like I said, just a real quick wipe down, you're ready to go. So what we'll do is we'll take our wood and we'll position it on our clamps more or less like we want it. Okay. And you're going to flip them over because we're going to put a lot of glue on these. Okay, once you have all your boards positioned and roll the right direction on your clamps, you want to put a lot of glue. I usually put more than enough glue. I will just put a good bead on each board before I go any further. I like to use these little cheap condiment bottles because they seem to squeeze out easier for me. And it gets a pretty even bead. Doesn't leave you struggling with it. So once you got the glue on there, you're kind of racing against the clock. You need to make sure that you're working towards getting this put together, because that glue will start to set up on you pretty quick. Alright, so we got a pretty good bead on it. I'll take one of these little cheap paint brushes and I'll just start brushing the glue in. And at this point, I'm not really worried about squeeze out. It's going to make a huge mess. That's just part of it, guys. Put some paper down on your workbench and rock on. But you want to get a good covering of glue on every piece. If you see any spots that look like they're missing some, come back and add some to it. You don't want a weak glue seam. Glue is a lot cheaper than scrapping a cutting board, I promise you. So far everything's looking really good. We're just gonna finish spreading this last little bit of glue out, and then we're going to inspect it really quickly and make sure there's not any spots that we want to add a little bit more, which it looks like we have a couple places I want to add just a tiny bit more. Like I said, don't worry about making a mess or let's squeeze out. We're going to deal with that in just a little bit. Okay. Once it looks like we have a good coat of glue, we're going to start to flip our pieces over where we want them and start putting this thing together. So flip that one that way. Once you have the glue on all your pieces and you have them all turned the way you want them, just kind of slide them in towards your clamps. And this is the point where I'll take a damp rag and I'll wipe just a tiny bit off the surface so I can lay my square on there just to make sure we're getting a pretty good, pretty square edge. I'll lay my square against my clamps and I'll just more or less try to square them up with the edge of my clamp. It doesn't have to be perfect. This cutting board will be trimmed on both ends, but you know, the closer you get it, the better, right? Okay, we have it where I feel like it's pretty close. It's off a tiny bit here and there, but like I said, we're going to trim this board on both ends anyways. But you want to get it as close as you can. We'll remove our square. And yeah, I guess my square filled. And we'll bring our clamps in. And we'll just put a tiny bit of pressure on it for now. Nothing much, just a couple with your fingers. A couple turns with your fingers. Just to kind of take up some of the gaps. Here, just a couple turns. Once it starts to grab, to take up the gaps, and then I'll come back with that square I just threw on the floor to wipe some of this glue off. And we'll check one more time to make sure we kind of like the alignment. Like I said, it's not going to probably be perfect, but as long as you're in the ballpark, you're good. So we got a few pieces that could shift one way or the other, but it's close enough for what we're doing. This cutting board's way longer than I need it anyways. So we're going to proceed. The next thing I like to do is I have some of these cauls I made. They're just made out of plywood with some packaging tape on top of them so glue won't stick to them. And what I'll do is I'll put them right here on my board. In 3 places on a 24-inch board, just to keep everything nice and flat while it's being clamped. If not, sometimes you can end up with a board with a bow in the middle of it when you put pressure on the other clamps. It can be difficult to hold these in place, but you'll stick with it, you'll get it eventually. I do use Titebond 3. It does give you a longer working time, and it's waterproof. That's the only glue I like to use on cutting boards. I've tried other ones in the past, but the one that gives me the best results has always been Titebond 3. So on the end boards, I like to put 3 clamps just to help hold in the middle a little bit. And I'll put 3 of these cauls. 3 sets of these cauls on the board. One in the middle. Sometimes clamps fall. Seems like my cameraman has a case of the giggles today. And I'll do one on the end also. And this is going to give you a nice flat panel when you're done. You're not going to have to spend a lot of time sanding, a lot of uneven spaces. It's very important that you get these coils on here before the glue starts to set up. So once I get them on here, I will actually back off these other clamps a tiny bit just to make sure there's no pressure on them. And I'll make sure these are good and snug, but not so snug that my other clamp, when I tighten the parallel clamps, they will not be able to pull the joints together tight. It's kind of a balancing act. You do a little bit on these, a little bit on those, and at the end of the day, you'll end up with something pretty cool. So now that I got those pretty much snugged up, I will come back and tighten my parallel clamps until I see some squeeze out. You don't want to over tighten these too much. The worst thing you can do is starve a glue joint on the cutting board. It will end up failing on you later, and that's not good for anybody. So you just put a little bit of pressure till you start to see some glue squeeze out. And because we already wiped it, you won't see as much squeeze out, but I'm watching it's looking pretty good. Okay, so once you have those tight, I'll come back and I'll put 2 more parallel clamps across the top. Some of y'all might say it's overkill, but I've never had one fail on me yet, and they always make really good glue seams. But again, you don't have to get crazy with tightening these clamps. Just enough to pull everything up and you see some good squeeze out coming out everywhere. And every now and then you might run into a situation where you can't get your clamp to fit. That's not a huge deal. Just loosen up your coil and slide them out the way wherever you need it. But it looks like it's going to work out for me tonight, so that's pretty cool. And if you happen to be considering buying any clamps, parallel clamps specifically, I highly recommend the Jorgensen ones. I prefer them over any other brand of clamp. I've used Bessie's, I've used the Irwins, but I have the very best luck with the Jorgensen clamps. Even after you have glue on them, they're so much more smooth operating than any other clamp I've used. So once you have all 5 of your parallel clamps in place, just come back and put a little bit more tension on your coils just to make sure everything's pretty flat. Seems like we're looking pretty good. I'm happy with all that. I'm seeing good squeeze out. I'm not seeing any gaps in my cutting board anywhere. I think we're going to be all right. The last final thing I'll do is I'll put 1 clamp on each end of the cutting board just to give it a little something extra. And you don't want to get too carried away with these. You just put enough pressure on the clamp to where the clamp doesn't want to fall when you let go of it. I say 1 on each side. And like I said, sometimes your clamps will get in your way. You got to move them out the way. It's not a big deal. Just take your time. Get everything like you want it. Make sure everything's nice and straight and snug. You don't have to, like I said, you do not want to over tighten them, because you can have your glue joint fail on you later because you'll squish all the glue out of there. Alright, so once you're to this point, I recommend letting it sit overnight and dry up. One thing to remember is take a look on underneath the bottom of your cutting board and make sure everything looks like it's sitting nice and flat on the bars of your clamps. And in my situation, everything's sitting nice and flat and tight, just like you want to see it. I will go ahead and take my damp rag and wipe this side off. This will be the side that we set down on the CNC machine. So I can actually, when I surface the cutting board, I can use the surfacing bit to clean all the glue off the other side. So I'm not even worried about any of that glue squeeze out on the bottom, because I can take it all off with the surfacing bit. Or you could do it with a router sled or a belt sander, whatever you have handy. But this is how I do it. And I've built hundreds of cutting boards, and I've never had one fail yet. And they've always come out with really, really nice tight glue joints. That being said, this is going to be turned into a CNC project. It's going to be a tequila shot board for somebody, a customer of mine. So stay tuned, and I will show you all how it goes from this stage to the next. And I will also be making a video shortly to show you guys how I made that jig I showed you for the cutting board for the clamps. Because before I started doing this, using this particular jig, I was struggling with my clamps falling over. Every time I was trying to tighten one up, another one fall over, and there was glue everywhere. It just made a huge mess. So this has been a lifesaver. I know people make panel clamp racks, but I don't have the space for it. And honestly, this is very versatile. I can put it however many I need out for however big the board is, and it's just been a game changer. So I will show you guys how I made it in another video. If you guys want, just comment down below if you'd like to see me make that. That being said, for tonight, we're gonna just let it dry, and I'll show you tomorrow when we take the clamps off. Alright, so the glue's had plenty of time to dry. The only thing we've done so far is we've taken the board out of the clamps, and if there was a little tiny bit of glue on the top, I just used a card scraper and I just scraped off until it just felt flat to the touch. I didn't worry about getting every last little bit. Remember I told you guys before, I'm not too concerned with the glue on the bottom of the board. We're going to machine that away with the CNC machine. But take a look close here, guys. This is right out of the clamps. I haven't sanded it or nothing. I have not flattened it, but you can see that there's no gaps. Everything looks real tight. There's no cupping this way, and if I move the straight edge, there's no bowing. So that was the benefit of using those jigs and those cawls. It really, really helps you hold your board straight. So if you come in close here, you can see, you can barely even see lines in the wood where the glue gaps are. It's a really, really tight board. So I'm really happy with that so far. We will be taking this over to the CNC machine to flatten it. But if you don't have a CNC machine, don't worry. You can use your regular benchtop planer, or if you have to, a router sled. I've done lots of projects in the past on the whole tables where I had to set up a little temporary router sled and just use my handheld router, sliding it back very carefully to flatten it. So you don't have to have a CNC to do this, but it will it'll speed it up for us. We're going to be taking off a couple thousandths at a time just until we see everything clean up, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the project we'll be making. This is going to be a tequila shot board for a customer of ours. We'll drop in a couple pictures of one we did in the past. But just to show you the design for this one here, it's going to look like this here. It just has a little spot for your shot glasses, your salt, your lime with your juice groove, and it has, you know, the stacked text design. I'm not going to be showing my process for the way we design this in the software this time, because the videos are already going to be kind of long. If you'd like to, I do plan on making a video for that, but if you'd like to see it sooner, leave me some comments down below and we'll move it up on our schedule. It's not that complicated. There's a few cool features in the Vectric software that will help you get it on the way to make it easy for you. So I guess follow us along. We're going to put it on the CNC, get it flattened real quick, and I'll get this carved out. We'll come back over here to the bench and I'll show you the way I sand it and I finish the board to make it absolutely flawless. Okay, so we decided we're going to go ahead and stop the video right here. It's starting to run kind of long. We're going to turn this into a 3-part series. In the next part of the series, I'll be showing you guys how I do the sanding and treating the board with the oil and the waxes that we use, as well as putting the feet on. The final part of the series, I'm going to show you guys how I design it in the Vectric software. We create our toolpaths and we'll go out on the CNC and we'll carve it out. So follow along for that. And I do thank you guys for watching to the end of the video. I do want to apologize for some of the camera work. My camera guy is just learning how to do this, and all we can do is get better. But as always, thank you for tuning in to Doran Woodworking and Designs, and we'll see you on the next one.